And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thanks so much for joining us once again. And it is great to have Jimmy Glazov back with us again after bumping into him back in, wasn't it January in LA, Jimmy?
Yes, what a crossing of paths it was.
It was good to meet you at long last in person. You actually do exist. You in person. It was great to talk to you
It was
there
great
at
to
the
speak
bar
with you.
and that
Yeah.
great event. And we want to get on to your latest book, which is an update, United and Hate, and we're going to touch on that. But of course, people can follow you there. Is your X handle, Front Page Magazine, Glazov Gang, David Horowitz, Freedom Center Fellows. So many hats you have on, and so many great videos I've watched of you as you fight the fight on the issue of Islam. And this is a intriguing book. Let me just bring up the front cover. The link is in the description. Wherever you are in the world, you can get hold of a copy. And it's United and Hate: The Left's Romance with Tyranny, Terror, and Hamas. And it's a phenomenal thread that runs through the book, and of course a great uh, forward by Ambassador Mike Huckabee. Um, Maybe Jimmy, get on to the book. One of the things that really stuck out with me was you start the book by referring to huge seismic events, 9/11, and then the attack in Israel on the 7th of October. I think both of those have forced the world to reconsider what they think of Islam or to ignore what they think, either or. Maybe tell us a little bit about why you see those two events as pivotal, because they have the same ideology behind them, although attacks on two separate countries, but it's against the great Satan and the little Satan, I guess.
Yeah, well, thank you, Peter. Well, one perspective that I see it in, which I think is one of the most important perspectives, is United in Hate shows when the Stalinist killing fields were at their height, when Maoist killing fields were at their height, when the North Vietnamese killing fields were at their height, when Castro's killing fields were at their height. The left was in euphoria. It was at the peak of ecstasy, and the fellow traveling escalated physically by the travels where the leftists traveled to those killing fields and they bowed at the altar of communism, or they did it from their host society. So I'm very interested in that. And so as I document about 9/11, when 9/11 happened, I remember after the fall of the Soviet Union, so many leftists I knew, even in my personal life, they were just so depressed, so despondent. They lost a sense of purpose. And then 9/11 happened. And I remember there was this sparkle in their eye, and they were just back in action. Oh, and it just they had another sense of meaning in their lives again. And when October 7th happened, I knew immediately, because what I knew was that for normal people, we look and say, oh, look what Hamas is doing. Islam is evil. We're on the side of the victims, the Jewish people. The left doesn't think that way. So when October 7th happened, I immediately knew, oh, there's going to be a skyrocketing escalation of Jew hatred and anti Semitism on the left. And the greatest fear is that the anti-Israel, anti-American impulse will enter the conservative ranks because it's so infectious. And that is what's happened. As we know, this is a very dangerous new phenomenon on the right now that has a Stockholm syndrome with Islam. So I see October 7th and 9/11 as a reminder to us that while the left wears the mask of humanitarianism and love, it's a malicious, demonic movement addicted to blood. And those two events, as I document, it inspired the left because they live vicariously through this bloodshed.
You picked up on a lot of themes throughout, and we'll end on that chapter 13 to hit a Jew, and the confusion on part of the right that I thought would have no issue with the Jewish people or with Israel. They do, but we'll finish off on that and leave the viewer and the listener to get the book and to look at part 4 themselves. We'll not touch on that romance with terror, but there was a chapter 1. You start with a quote: "The roots of denial. Nothing is easier than self deceit. For what each man wishes, that he also believes to be true."
Mm,
And it's a fascinating quote. And I'm wondering, is it willful ignorance, or
mm,
is it something more sinister, more evil, what we see on the left?
mm. Well, that's a great question. Well, I've dedicated my life to trying to understand this. Holocaust denial, jihad denial, and Hamas denial, Gulag denial. What is it? And, one of the fellow travelers that went to the Soviet Union was talking to one of the operatives there at one time. And he said, "You deceived us." And the KGB operative answered, "You wanted to be deceived." And so this is quite a question. Um, when we think, just the period that we're coming out of, when we saw the people in the lineup to get the substance injected into them. And there's many, many cases of somebody in front of the line that got it, that just drops dead or drops unconscious, and the ambulance comes and the stretcher comes and they take them out. And the people stay in line. What is that? In 1937, 1938, some of Stalin's speeches in the Politburo, he made it very clear that a purge was going to start and he was going to kill the Politburo members, and they were chanting Stalin, Stalin. So there's a combination there, Peter. But as a Christian, I see a spiritual realm here. And for instance, I'll just say what's happening now in terms of many people on the right that look at Nigerian killing fields now, where the Boko Haram and jihadists are massacring in a genocide Christians, and their first thought is Israel's behind that. Israel's behind that. Instead of asking, what are these jihadists reading? What are they listening to? And so we have a situation now. You see, these people know that if they criticize Jews and Israel, nothing's going to happen to them. They know that subconsciously, consciously. They know that if they go at Islam, they know what might very well happen to them. So there's a certain thing happening where you're ingratiating yourself with your potential executioner, where the captured are grateful for their kidnappers, where the captured are grateful and trying to worship the people who might kill them. Now, the other ones are not trying to avoid death. This is a very, very malicious death wish suicidal movement. And so some temporarily are trying to avoid death, others are just going at it full throttle. You got to ask yourself, why would you open up a border of a country and let in, you know, Al Qaeda, ISIS, drug cartel, rapists? What's happening there exactly? But I would say that on one level, definitely there's a preservation happening in a temporary way where they know what's safe to do. So I remember one place I worked at many years ago when I was young, and there was a guy stealing from the workplace, but the owner was very scared of him, and so he would always yell at some of us for coming in 2 minutes late or for not wearing the best clothing to work, but he couldn't confront the main problem. And on many levels, that's what's happening now. This is very dangerous what's happening now, because Israel and Jewish people are not posing a great threat of taking over the world. And I don't lose sleep at night thinking of Orthodox Jews or secular Jews maybe having power over me. But when you have jihadists have power over you, that's a bit scary. But what the right is even doing now is it's saying, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, and that way Islam is coming in. Mamdani in New York, we see all of this happening, what's happening in the United States, and you can't stop it now. And they don't want to confront it. So what you say is that it's the Jew while the jihadists are taking over. And it's a brilliant strategy. And the unholy alliance of the left and of jihad have brainwashed these people, have threatened these people, have bought these people. There's many layers here, but I'm sorry if it sounded like a little bit of a incoherent tirade on some level, but I am putting some of the pieces together into the puzzle.
No, you are, and it is that thread and part to the romance with tyranny, and you start with worshipping the first communist death cult, looking at the Soviet Union, and give a history. And you point out earlier, I think in maybe the first or second chapters, how it's the left that forget history, maybe willfully, or in other ways. But when you look at the Soviet Union, there in chapter 3, um, I'm wondering, is that the first major example of a system that attracted this kind of devotion? I mean, that sets new precedent for more authoritarian regimes later. Was that one of the first early examples, really?
Well, of course, it's one of the first, but this is it's one of the first we can really point to.
Yeah.
But there's a long history of this, and if you want to get into a deeper discussion, where is your brother? Am I my brother's keeper?
Mm.
Cain's murder of Abel, the first communist revolution, the pretension to equality, and and how many people, you know, are in a state of rebellion against God and are full of jealousy and envy. And so this is very much a spiritual battle, but absolutely the communist revolution and what started happening with Lenin and Stalin, definitely a landmark watershed in history of where the left began to worship these killing fields.
In chapter 4, you talk about the new left, renewed instinct for destruction. I know the rise of the new left in the 60s and 70s, as a movement that, I guess, shifted from certain policies towards more radical, revolutionary goals, despite maybe the 60 generation having it so good. But when you kind of look at that and you expand on, I'm wondering, do you see the new left as, I guess, reshaping modern activism permanently? Because we are really living in the chaos that that's produced.
Uh-huh. Well, look, they call it the new left and the new this, and there's always new names for it, but it's always the same impulse, right? And it's what we really have underneath here, despite all the different masks, is the belief that we can get back to Eden on our own. We can get back there without God, and that we can be gods. And so this is really all about self-appointed redeemers who get to decide who goes to hell and who goes to heaven, quote unquote. They decide who are the damned and who are the saved. And so they call themselves the new left or woke or whatever these names are. But there was Stalin's Gulag. There were the re-education camps in North Vietnam. And the period that we're just coming out of, where they were trying to put certain substances in our body, we know very well how those of us who didn't want to do that were treated by the good ones, the ones who followed the orders. And they loved humanity so much, and they were doing it for granddad. but we know what they were ready to do with us. And they did do a lot of things to us, but imagine if they had total power, what they would have done to us and what they still plan to do to us. So this is a totalitarian, malicious movement, and they're ready to exert power, and they're very hungry to exert power. And make no mistake, when October 7th happened, and when it's continuing, and what's happening in Nigeria with Christians, and in Congo, and throughout the Middle East, when Jews and Christians are the victims of genocide, this willful blindness and silence of the left, it's it's interwoven. Holocaust denial is always interwoven with the desire for another Holocaust. They're pretending they don't see it, but they're enjoying it, because you see, the left is living vicariously through this. And we have to always keep that in mind. It's a very, very malicious movement, and it could put on the mask of being something new, but it's always the same old thing. And you got to ask yourself, they did it in the Soviet Union, 30, 40 million killed. They do it in Maoist China, up to 80 million killed. North Vietnam, killing fields. Cambodia, killing fields. Castro, killing fields. Oh, let's just try this again. We're the new left. We're just going to do it a little differently this time. They know very well what they're going to do, because, you see, Jesus' blood redeems us. It saves us. The leftist enterprise that's rooted in the demonic realm, it's a carbon copy, but mutated carbon copy of Jesus. You see, the devil is always mutating things and putting it upside down. So there's going to be blood, but it will be human blood. It will be our blood that's going to disinfect the earth. It's a very, very dark movement, but it's exactly why Mao wrote how important it is to kill millions of people, because they're washing and disinfecting the earth to build their new paradise. And that's where the alliance comes in. The left was very excited with Ground Zero, 9/11, you see, because on those ashes, it will create its classless utopia. So the jihadists are creating Sharia utopia. The left is creating classless utopia. They're not united in love. They're united in, and it rhymes with Tate.
It's it's sort of, and you go through, you look at Castro's Cuba, you look at Vietnam and Mao's China and Nicaragua, and you see that thread, and I guess that is all about a fear of truth, an attack on truth, when say that the truth will set you free. And all of these regimes are the opposite of freedom. They want to keep people in bondage. And then into part three, the death cult's cousin, Islamism. I love some of your chapter headings. And this is a yearning for death and suicide. And this is I guess, me difficult for us in the West to grasp, to understand. I guess why martyrdom is such a powerful force. Unpack that a little bit, and maybe help us understand that like alien concept to maybe many of us in the West.
Yes. Well, Peter, thank you for your comment on my titles. What's very interesting, you don't know how many people have told me, but I'll never remember one person. He said to me, when I look at your titles, I just think this guy's a whack job. This guy's crazy. This guy's a lunatic. And then he said, and then I begin to read your chapter and I realize it's true. And so a lot of people don't want to listen to me, don't want to listen to people like me. Um, a very large number of people have an emotional incapacity, and they just can't hear this stuff. And they think they have political views, but it's actually just a emotional incapacity, because they just want everything to be okay. And they just want to believe that, and I'm getting to your question here. They want to believe that, Kenneth Levin has written a brilliant book, The Oslo Syndrome. And he analyzes communities under siege, the psychology, and the Israelis that were for the Oslo syndrome, for Oslo. And it's beyond reasonable doubt that the people that they're dealing with are fascinated with blood, as you are asking with bloodshed, with others people's blood, with their own blood. But the leftist Israelis were thinking, just a few more hugs. We just give a few more hugs, just a little bit more money and a little bit more land, and everything will be okay. And then somebody like Jamie Glazov or Robert Spencer or Annie Cyrus or Bosch Foston comes forward and says, everything's not going to be all right. Like in terms of the short term on this earth, it's not going to be okay. These people hate you and they want to kill you. And a lot of people, they can't get through the day and get to sleep at night. So they need to demonize the messengers and they need to believe in fairy tales. And they don't want to believe in what you're asking about martyrdom. And, and I document in United in Hate where, so let's just even on October 7th, we know that there was many of those individuals, perpetrators, one in particular, it's become infamous. He's on the phone, Mom, Dad, I just killed a Jew. And he's very excited that there's all this blood and he killed a Jew. And we know that Palestinian mothers that are indoctrinated in jihad, this is all documented. We see their videos. They're celebrating, their martyred sons. And people will say, oh, no, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. No, you don't want to believe it. But the reality is when these people open the texts and begin to read their texts, the Quran and the Hadith, something starts happening to people when they read these texts. And blood becomes a very important thing, martyrdom for the idea of jihad. And it's a hatred of God's infrastructure, of God's creation, of God's order. And in terms of suicide bombers in Islam, for instance, when they've interviewed a lot of them in Israeli jails, one thing becomes very evident. They're not allowed to do anything. There's no joy. As Khomeini says, there's no fun in Islam. They can't do this. They can't do this. They can't do this. They can't do anything. Oh, but they're going to get some action in paradise in terms of the erotic realm. So look, it's so miserable here. Let me just off myself and get up there, right? And so there's a fascination with death and bloodshed that's interwoven in that. For the leftist that hates man for who and what he is, hates God's creation, hates human nature. You see, because the left believes that this gets back to what we're saying about the new left and all this BS. It's the Marxist idea that you can take a human being and shape him like clay and create the new Soviet man, right? And so they believe that you just shape them like this. Like Andrea Dworkin was once saying that once they reconstruct humans and reconstruct the human being, she was a radical feminist, that there would be certain things that men, evil men wouldn't want to do anymore, and they're going to do this and do that. And nobody has the monopoly on good and evil. Men have their evil, women have their good and evil. We just need redemption through Christ. But for the leftists, they think that they can remold the human being. And it keeps failing. It keeps failing. It keeps failing. So if you hate man for who and what he is, what happens when you begin to look in the mirror? And so you got to ask yourself, David Horowitz in Radical Son, one of the best examples, writes about a leftist lady he knew. And there was a rapist in the neighborhood at that time. And the witnesses said that he was black. And his leftist friend said that she's not going to be she's not going to be racist. And she wouldn't lock her front door and her back door because she wasn't going to be racist. And they found her not just raped, but dead. You got to ask yourself, is that suicide? Is that suicide? Suicide for the idea. And I see the leftist movement very much as suicide by cop. You see the suicide by cop going out there, the guy or girl that wants to, What if that becomes an entire ideology and movement? And the scary thing, Peter, with the left is, hey, you want to kill yourself, go ahead. But they're taking us all down with them. So there's a fascination with human blood, absolutely, of martyrdom, and they're giving their life for the idea in the Islamic jihadist realm and also in the leftist realm. They give their lives for this. I mean, as I document in the book and then further in my writings, the leftist feminists that travel to the Palestinian territories, excuse me, to ally themselves with, the Palestinian community slash terrorists, they're getting raped, they're getting butchered, they're getting abused, and then they don't talk about it because they don't want to, delegitimize the cause. But what are they doing going there? You know, Vittorio Aragoni, very, very famous case, a leftist homosexual activist in Italy, traveled. He loved Hamas. He went down there. They killed him. And people are like, oh, why did it happen? Why did it happen? What do you mean? Why did it happen? He went there to die. Deep down, he knew what was going on there. He knew who he was worshiping. But somewhere there's definitely a death wish there. And the scary thing now, Peter, is this is happening to the West. It is so, I mean, look what's happened to your country. And we see a suicide happening.
No, we do. There was I just want to read just a few lines on that chapter, chapter 9, which was intriguing and helps you understand the bloodthirstiness of this. And this is also why when the mullahs discovered that Iraq planned to start killing Iranians in a manner that would not cause blood to flow, they immediately sought a truce. As Peter Raditz explains in the Iranian death cult, there is a Shiite fatwa ruling um, that talks a question of martyrs dying of poison gas. At the end of the Iran-Iraq war, Saddam's troops had started sending rockets into Tehran with rumors going that they would soon be equipped with nerve gas. And the truce was accelerated as a jurist ruled that a Muslim dying from a gas rocket could not enter paradise since there would be no blood involved, which must flow generously in order to constitute martyrdom. That was one of the many little nuggets that I thought, wow, I had no idea about that. And that really makes you stop
Yeah.
and think. But no, that idea of the blood must flow is horrendous, and yet
Yes.
seems to be a crimson thread, if I can use that, that flows
Yes.
throughout Islam.
Yes. And people in the West search for any other reason. When you see the videos of October 7th and you just see the blood-stained beds and floors and walls, and then you see all the leftist students in the West screaming Allahu Akbar alongside, the other Muslim students, and they're screaming, from the river to the sea and all this stuff, and they're so excited, and you see those videos. What's going on there? And so the easier thing to do is go, oh, wait, the Jews must have done something to upset them. This is resistance. But what if it's something else? And this is a spiritual war. And like I said, it's an upside down, it's a death wish, and it's a mutated carbon copy of Jesus and Jesus's blood and our Lord and Savior dying for us and us being redeemed through his blood, and what the leftist demonic enterprise is doing. Even though a lot of people hate this kind of talk and they don't want to hear it, oh well. Once you begin to, if you listen to, I mean, I don't mean listen to me, I just mean listen to what people are saying about this that tell the truth, and maybe you'll start understanding it. That Mao meant what he said. We got to kill millions of people. And you see, because human blood for them is going to redeem the earth. And then they're going to create their paradise. And, David Horowitz was always stressing this theme to me. I had the honor of being at his right-hand side for 25 years. And he was a former leftist. He knew Eve was from the belly of the beast, but he always was telling me that bloodshed that they need to cause, that gives them the seriousness of their enterprise. If there's no blood, it's just not serious enough. You can't really remake the world in your own image. You gotta cause blood. And it's a very bloody movement. And once you begin to accept that, it all begins to make sense. Peter, when we look at what the Iranian regime is, when you look at the mullahs, when you think about what they did to William Higgins while they had him as hostage, one of the proxies of Iran and Hezbollah, and the torture they perpetrated against William, and also of William Buckley, the Marine barracks. They've killed more than 1,000 Americans over the years. What they've done to their own people. This is the hub of terror. This is the matrix and the fertile soil of jihadist terror. This is one of the most evil regimes in world history, filled full of blood. The mullahs' hands drenched in blood of what they just did to the Persian people, what they've done to them you know, for ages. Look at the last 47 years, but just in the recent past, just mowing them down in the streets, raping them, torturing them, up to 50, 60,000 of them. Let me ask you, how could you possibly be on their side? How could you possibly be rooting for them against the United States? Yes, there's TDS, absolutely. A lot of people have serious illness of Trump derangement syndrome. Some people are very clinically ill with this disease, but it's larger than that. And it's interconnected with this thirst for blood.
There's a chapter 12, Killing and Dying for Purity. You started with a quote, "Thank God my son is dead." And that's from a Muslim Palestinian mother celebrating that her son had become a Shahid. Um, that was one of the, I had to set the book down and think, wow, let me try and process that. But then in that same chapter, you go on to talk about, um, of course, there are some sexual treats offered to Muslim warriors who do not die in battle, as mentioned, chapter 11. While it is a sin in Islam to have sex outside marriage, Allah makes an exception for the Muslim warrior who wants to rape the women of conquered infidels. And when Pakistani Muslim soldiers raped 250,000 Bengali
Yeah.
women in 1971 after massacring 3 million unarmed civilians, it was not just a coincidental wave of sexual exploitation. Again, we forget history, we forget what has happened, but we also forget how, I guess, Islam dehumanizes women. This should be something that the left are shouting from the rooftops, and yet there seems to be silence on this.
Oh, absolutely. And oh man, I get so tired. Why is there so much silence? How come they don't say anything? Bill O'Reilly used to really get on my nerves in this way. Why are they? He was always saying on all these stuff. Why are they doing this? I think Barack Obama just really means well, but why is he doing this? Like, why don't you? Do you want to know or you don't want to know? And so in the West, I'm going through my Twitter, my X feed all day long. Why are the leftist feminine? Why are the feminists silent? Why are the feminists silent? Okay, do you want to know the answer? Or you don't want to know the answer. I used to think Bill O'Reilly, like all these questions you're asking about the left, you're always so incredulous. Just invite David Horowitz and he'll explain it to you if you don't want to invite me. But they like to live in this blurriness and they don't know, and it's a mystery. Well, it's not a mystery at all. Once you understand what the left is, there's nothing mysterious about it. The left doesn't care about women. Leftist feminists don't care about women. Feminism for them is that Martha and Susie can have 5, 6, 7 abortions, and they're worried there's only been 7. There needs to be 8. That's leftist feminism in the West, okay? And so and I've dealt with them all my life. I've approached, during my graduate studies in university, I remember saying, okay, you're a feminist, right? Okay, all right, I get the abortion thing. Here's a petition I have right here. There's honor killing and female genital mutilation in the Islamic world. Here's the verses that inspire and sanction all this stuff. Can you just sign and be against this because you're for women's rights? And they would just turn ashen white. and they would be like, "Are you a fascist?" And then they would run away, because feminism for leftist feminists is about having a weapon to whip their own society. It's about destroying their own society. If it's not a weapon that they can destroy their own society with, they're not interested. Not only are they not interested, they support the torture and rape of the women under those regimes. It goes much, much darker than that. And, I would bring up this, that when you see, in Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, you can sometimes see in on different levels, but you can see, for instance, in Pakistan, you'd have these mobs of women dressed all in these black garbage bags with these sticks, and they're running around beating the women or people who aren't dressed properly. We know this is happening in Iran with the Saudi morality police, but women are often involved in this. And this is the ingrate. You're trying to out radicalize your potential executioner, right? So, and in the West, I'll just end with this because we have so much to talk about and people should read the book. But if your main agenda is to destroy your own society, you're living in the democratic capitalist West, you want to destroy your own society. And somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, look what they're doing to the women in Iran under Islam." And you go, "Oh, but if you agree and you say that that's bad, guess what you might be admitting? That maybe there are foreign ideologies and adversaries whose systems are evil. And if there are evil enemies, you might have to admit that the West is morally superior, that America is better, is superior, and has a better way of life." If you admit that, then you might have to take the next step and admit that our society and civilization is worth defending and protecting. You can't take all the, they're trying to destroy this society. So you got to take Islam and go, this is why Noam Chomsky was so adamant in denying the reports of the refugees coming out of the Cambodian killing fields. Because if you accept what's happening there, it's going to delegitimize the whole leftist enterprise. And so the left is very, very consumed with denying what's happening in terms of the enemy ranks. And when it comes to leftist feminists, absolutely, they will be cold-hearted when women are being persecuted in in these foreign adversarial cultures. Absolutely, and deep down, they're happy that it's happening to them because they hate women and they hate themselves, and that's why they're so busy trying to shed themselves of their own femininity. And at the risk of going on too long here, I've done a lot of thinking about this, and you know, when a woman in the West, there's so many cases of this. If you don't have children and you hate Trump and you're going against God's order, what are the chances that you're going to have purple hair and a nose ring and tattoos and screaming and blocking traffic? Very high. And so there's a direct line there of when you start to go against God's creation, what begins to happen to you. And in terms of the leftist feminist movement, it becomes very, very destructive.
We see that all over. Let me just finish off on one final part. And this is chapter 13, The Hated Jew, and we touched on it, but this is a common thread on the left and Islam. It's this utter hatred of the Jewish people, utter hatred of Israel, and seemingly acquiescing to every um, crazy country around Israel that has so little freedoms for anyone. And if we can finish off on that, because this is a huge debate which you mentioned on. If only we understood the history of Islam and Israel, if only we understood actually Jewish history of how the miracle that Israel is, and when I say Israel, the home of the Jewish people, or the Israelites, when you go back to 3,000 years of history of Jerusalem and further back to Abraham. Maybe just finish to let us know your thoughts on why you've got this joint hatred of the
Mm,
Jews from
mm.
the left and from Islam.
Well, I'm going to touch on something that's almost never talked about, and when I start talking like this, a lot of people start, "Oh, what the hell is this guy talking about?" But you want to look a little bit closely. Uh, I want to begin with this and maybe just leave it at this. When we look at what Hitler was doing, and we just look at those gas chambers, and we look at Auschwitz, and we look at Buchenwald, and we look at Dachau, and if we believe in a spiritual realm, something's happening there. Who's behind that? And we know that it's Satan. And you got to ask yourself, why is Satan trying to kill all the Jews? He hates Jews. He's trying to kill all the Jews. Now, obviously Satan hates everybody and everything that God created, but he has his priorities and who he hates a little more and blah blah blah, And so, and I just approach this very humbly. What do I know? But I get a little bit of the theologians that I read, of what I've been thinking about. This is all very much of a mystery, but we have some just some bare things that we understand. Satan hates Jews and he hates Christians, but let's just talk about the Jews for a minute. These are the people and the tribe that God chose to bring his message into the world, his law into the world, etc. And by the way, chosen doesn't mean you're better and superior. They had a certain obligation and role to play. And this is often also very misunderstood. People think, oh, they think that they're better. This is absolutely not true. They have a certain obligation and role that God wanted them to have. So Satan hates Jewish people for that. But God chose a Jewish woman for a reason, to bring his son into the world. There's a reason why God also chose the Jewish people, because through the Jewish people, Jesus came into the world. Roy Schoeman has written a very fascinating book. He's a former Jew who became Catholic. Salvation Comes Through the Jews. Fascinating book, and he touches on this. So Jesus comes through a Jewish woman and through the Jewish people the first time. And we know, and when we leave a lot of this to God, this is a tremendous mystery, but we know that the second coming of our Savior also comes through the Jewish narrative, through the Jewish people, however it's going to happen. And Satan doesn't have complete access to divine wisdom. He knows this and that. But for instance, even with Christ's crucifixion, what happened there, he was tricked on many levels. He knew this and that, but he didn't know this, right? And so he was tricked. And he thinks that he can stop the second coming. And what's one of the ways he thinks he can either stop it or prevent it or frustrate it? What if he kills all the Jews? What side do I want to be on? I don't want to be on that side. And we also know in the Bible, we know things are going to get worse before we get better. We share a lot with our Jewish brothers and sisters. Obviously, we disagree on the Messiah, but in terms of the prophecies, it's going to get very, very dark. But then redemption does come in the end. But we know that they're going to gather against the Jewish people in Israel. And in some ways, it seems like it's happening right now. The whole world gathers against them, and there will be a lot of suffering. But at the very end, as Christians, we believe that we know that the faithful remnant, they'll recognize Yeshua. The Jewish people will recognize Jesus. The Orthodox Jews and the Jewish believers, they believe in another narrative, but we share a lot, that there's still a redemptive timeline there. And then God smites all the enemies of Israel after that, right? I know what side I want to be on. And I'm just always going to stand beside the Jewish people in Israel because they play a special role in God's plan. And so I see something very demonic happening here, Peter. And it's very scary at the moment because we see it skyrocketing. On the left, we got it. Got that one. We know what they're about. But the leftist virus is now infecting the right. And we know the individuals that are all getting really, really worked up with this, the Jews and Israel, and they're controlling Trump. And, and it's such an easy, lazy thing to do. I mean, it's an evil thing to do. But with some, I'm just saying, like Tucker, do me a favor. You know how many thousands of Pakistani Christian girls and Hindu girls are kidnapped and raped and forcibly converted on a monthly basis in Pakistan because of the Islamic texts? There's so many heart-wrenching stories of the poor mom and dads that lose their daughters, of what's happening to their daughters. Can you do one show on that? You do one show? Oh, wait, I forgot. You're too busy demonizing Israel and the Jewish people. It's a disgrace. And if you're a real Christian, why don't you do a show on that? Do a show on what's happening to Nigeria. Well, he did do a show about Nigeria. We know how that went. But do a show on what's actually happening there to the Christian people and why, and what these jihadists are reading and listening to. So, but absolutely, in terms of the Jew hatred, very, very, very deep rooted demonic entity there. It's very interesting, Peter, what they're trying to do now. Josh Hammer's very good at deconstructing all of this. He's got a great book out there and he talks about this a lot. But we see what they're doing right now, the unholy alliance, but also the what I would call the neo-Nazi communist Jew-hating woke right, or whatever you want to call them. They're trying to Bonhoeffer was also trying to fight this back in the day. He gave his life for it. They're trying to separate Jesus from Israel. They're trying to separate the New Testament from the Old Testament. They're trying to de-Judify Jesus, and they're trying to dislocate the Jewish people from their land. A lot of demonic stuff happening there. But I know I've said it several times. Those of us that are Christians, we know what side we want to be on. And there's a very powerful, we don't know who the Antichrist is and when he's going to come, but we do know that there's the spirit of the Antichrist. And when you look at Islam and take off your blindfold and really look at what it's doing, this is the spirit of the Antichrist, and it's taking over America right now. And to be sitting around talking about the Jews while this is happening, oh my Lord, that's another 2-hour discussion.
We will get to that another time. And as a follower of Christ, I 100% agree with you, Jimmy. Your synopsis of Islam, but also the confusing situation in many people's minds to Israel and the Jewish people, whenever it should be clear. Just bring up the book one last time. I'd encourage, the links are in the description. Do get a copy. It is a fascinating read, and I think will help us all understand the current situation we are in and why we are in it. Jimmy, thanks as always for giving us your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, Peter, I so appreciate you. I appreciate everything that you do. I appreciate you having me on, because it's a given that I'm not going to be invited on The View. It's a given I'm not going to be invited on, whatever it is, CBS, ABC, whatever's out there. But Peter, I am marginalized and pushed out now, even in our conservative ranks. We're very, very marginalized, and they're trying to silence us in this message. So I'm especially grateful to you.
And I assure you, I won't leave such a gap as I have done this time. So we'll have you on again soon. But Jimmy, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.